So you found the goat.
The Rings of Power is Amazon's prequel to The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and this series confuses me. Last season, the character the Stranger defeated some evil magic users. Now, I've watched every episode multiple times to make videos, and I still have no idea. Why did the wizards turn into moths? This show is once again back to switching storylines 20 to 30 times an episode. This show never seems to deliver the things I want to see. Vital plot points happen off camera and then the show tells me it's happened later, and this episode is just a doozy for that. Multiple people seem to come back to life off camera in this episode. This guy, Arondir the Elf, got a sword and an arrow through the chest just last episode and was bleeding out on the floor unconscious, surrounded by orcs trying to finish him off. And he turns up in this episode and he's just fine now. He walked it off, I guess. He felt it so much at the time, he almost showed an emotion. I swear this guy's acting range is like Amandla Stenberg in The Acolyte. Another elf got filled with orc arrows just last episode. He was also surrounded by enemies and bleeding out on the floor. He turns up at the end of this episode and he's just right as rain. His armour isn't even scratched. The show is still presenting as very camp.
Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
Durin will come. Durin will come.
I thought about what Amazon could do to make this series more popular, and my brain, which sometimes genuinely surprises me, kicked out the idea that they could recast Galadriel to be played by Sweeney, and that idea made me chuckle. Also, can you just imagine Sweeney trying to play Lady Macbeth? The show also doesn't seem to be a faithful adaptation of the source material at all. It's supposed to be based on the appendices of Lord of the Rings and a few other sources, and those appendices lay out a timeline for the story. It's in the Return of the King book. In the show, Ar-Pharazôn is now the King of Númenor, and Sauron hasn't made the One Ring yet. And this is an issue, because in the book timeline, this is supposed to be based on Sauron made the One Ring 1,655 years before Pharazôn became king. So, you know, just minor changes. And you don't have to trust me, I'll put a link to the PDF of the book below and you can look yourself. It's on page 1422 in this version, and that's just one example of many I could give you. They kind of confirm the Stranger is Gandalf in this episode. He's not even supposed to have arrived in Middle-earth yet. At this rate, I'm half expecting Bilbo Baggins to show up in the Rings of Power. Granted, he's not supposed to be born for another 3,500 years in the timeline, but that hasn't stopped the show so far. I thought for a moment that the different story threads are not supposed to be happening at the same time, but that can't be true either because the story threads cross over each other. The Rings of Power shows Galadriel meeting Isildur before the One Ring has been made, and Isildur also won't be born for over 1,600 years. So to a lot of people that will be a problem, but to me it's a far smaller one than the problem that the show has failed to make me care about a single character in it. Do you think I want to dislike this show? I don't. I'd prefer to be watching the classic and having a great time doing it, giving it great reviews. I just can't. How can I give it good reviews when characters are coming back to life off camera? This show, according to Google, has an estimated budget of $60 million per episode, and the writers they've brought in to write the show have a serious lack of experience, and frankly it shows. Episode 5 of this series was written by someone called Nicholas Adams, and before the Rings of Power they had one writing credit. One! The show has different writers for almost every episode, and to bring it all together, they have the showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, who also prior to the Rings of Power have one writing credit. Kind of. They were uncredited writers on the 2016 film Star Trek Beyond. They wrote a script with Robert Orci, who was going to direct it. The studio were clearly not happy with how it was going because they got a new director in, and Simon Pegg and someone called Doug Young were hired to completely rewrite the script. So Payne and McKay worked on one thing before this and it went very badly, and then Amazon gave them the most expensive series in TV history. It should be a shock to nobody that this series has gone badly. I still think the format of the show is also a major problem. At 8 episodes a season, they just don't have the time to build characters or relationships and do all of the story points they want to do. And 2 years in between seasons is just far too long for me. The people I watch this show with have forgotten a lot of what happened in season 1 2 years ago. I liked it more when series were longer with over 20 episodes a season. The reduction of episodes has come, if anything, with a reduction in writing quality to go with it. I can watch shows from the 1960s and they don't have half the writing issues that the Rings of Power has. It also has the same problems as Rebel Moon, trying to do payoffs to a setup that never happened. In this episode, Isildur is going to go back to Numenor, so he's saying his goodbyes. Him and Theo share a hug. And the show has just not built up these two as friends at all. They've shared literally seconds of on-screen time together. The show presents it like they're old friends with emotional music, but they literally just met. Similarly, Isildur and his love interest. The show just hasn't taken the time to build the romance. The Númenórean prince has just turned up in Pelagia. We never saw a scene where he was planning to go there, or where he was on the way. He just appeared thousands of miles away, and this is a habit for the show. The show is a good learning tool because it's taught me so many things not to do when writing. I see now why Tolkien left so much to the imagination when writing Sauron and Galadriel, because when the focus is fully on them in this show, they don't come across as ancient or wise, they come across instead as very dim humans. Some things are best left to the imagination or just hinted at. Like this clip from the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. I watched the films again recently and I'd love to know what's going on in there. It leaves me wanting more, but I'm not sure anything they could have shown in the films would live up to my imagination of what could be going on in there. Characters in the Rings of Power are still just teleporting around and just know things that the characters in the Rings of Power would have no way of knowing. Last time we saw Gandalf, he was in a valley of trees about to look for his magical staff. He just shows up in this episode at the village of the Hobbit things, exactly where his friend Nori is. He was told by Tom Bombadil last episode he had to choose between his friends or his fate of taking on Sauron and the Dark Wizard. He chose his friends off camera, which is another important plot moment that the show didn't show us. So he goes to his friends, and that, it turns out, leads him to his fate of facing Sauron and the Dark Wizard. And I'm not even sure what the show is trying to say with this. Is it trying to say that the only people that should have power are those that would choose friends over duty in the fate of the world? I don't know. Dark Wizard says to Gandalf, "Manwë promised you would come," which is a slight issue because the show has never introduced the concept of what Manwë even is. Manwë is the king of the lesser gods. Dark Wizard is waiting there for him and wants Gandalf to join him. The guys with the bug masks then come in with knives at the Hobbit thing's throats, and the Hobbits declare Dark Wizard evil when he uses his magic to do in one of the bugmen in order to save them. Despite the awkward fact that Gandalf did the exact same thing just a few episodes ago. If that act makes Dark Wizard evil, it also makes Gandalf evil. Gandalf says no, so Dark Wizard destroys the Hobbit thing's village and leaves. Gandalf tries to save the Hobbit things, so they start calling him Grand Elf, which isn't how he got his name in the source material either. If you've been watching my videos on this show, you would have known that last episode there was a large battle, and I was hoping that in that episode the dwarves would finally actually get to do something. We were nearing the end of season 2, and the closest the dwarves have got to a fight is this. So in the last episode, the Dwarven prince got quite a nice speech really. He was trying to rally the dwarves to go to battle and help the elves, and I was actually kind of feeling it and looking forward to seeing them do something. Then the Dwarven king went mad, attacked the dwarves guarding the mine, and the whole Dwarven army, we were told, had to stay to deal with him. So I didn't get anything for the dwarves yet again, and also where is Ben Daniels? I complimented this show early this season for bringing in some more experienced acting talent like Ben Daniels and Kieran Hines, and then they've barely been in the show. We haven't seen Ben Daniels since episode 2, but at least in the finale I get to see the whole dwarf army going to stop the king. So this episode starts and the Dwarven prince is going into the mines with a massive axe to confront his father the king. And where is the Dwarven army? If it's just the prince alone going down into the mines to confront the king, what are the rest of the army doing? If he was going to go alone, he could have sent the army to help the elves and his best friend Elrond. It's supposed to be one of this character's main motivations. He was going to depose his father, just to make that happen last episode, and this episode he just forgets about it. While an orc army is burning the elves' city down and probably doing in his best friend, he just seems to forget all about it. This character has a few motivations. Another is to save the dwarves' kingdom, and that's what I thought he was saving the army for last episode, but fine. At least I get to see Durin take on his father, that's something. And then they just talk about the prince's childhood instead, and the prince starts crying. The king breaks through a thin wall and unleashes the demonic Balrog, who cuts him down instantly. And what? That's it? Then the show has the prince have a memorial service for his fallen father. Not take the army outside to go and help his best friend stay alive. Not immediately start sealing off mine shafts in the hope of stopping the demon in their basement destroying the whole kingdom. They have a funeral instead. He also has the looming threat of a scheming brother that may try and steal the crown, and this would maybe have some impact if they'd ever actually shown the brother and built him up as a bad guy, but they haven't. This also creates massive issues for the timeline, once again, because the Dwarven king who just got Balrogged in the mine was Durin III. In the Return of the King book again, page 1406, the Balrog is supposed to appear 3,400 years after Sauron made the One Ring. In the show, the Balrog has just appeared and the ring hasn't even been made yet, so how is this supposed to work? Did the dwarves just forget about the giant growling fire demon in the basement and discover it again later? Then off camera the dwarves decide to help the elves, whose city has just been burned down and its people massacred. The orcs get surprise attacked by dwarves, somehow, who are blowing horns while they're coming on. The writing on this show is idiotic. We get under 30 seconds of the Dwarven army actually doing something, and that's your lot. Then Prince Durin wants a message passed to Elrond after the battle. Tell him Khazad-dûm stands ready to provide aid once more, and I'm not sure that will be great comfort to your best friend, who you just didn't help when you said you would for no reason whatsoever, and thousands of his people got massacred, and the entire city burnt to the ground, and you could have stopped it, and now in the aftermath, now you'll help. The writing on this show is an insult. The Balrog isn't supposed to show up for another 3,500 years, and it's supposed to be found by King Durin VI. Meanwhile, Sauron is still torturing Celebrimbor to try and find out where the 9 rings are, and again, the writing made me laugh out loud, because Sauron has put 5 arrows into Celebrimbor before he delivers this line.
Look what you have done to yourself. All I have done has been for you.
Oh yeah, you put 5 arrows in him for his benefit, did you? And Sauron says these lines like he expects Celebrimbor to believe them. They've made Sauron into an idiot. Galadriel confronts Sauron later, and Sauron just reveals that he didn't really have a plan at all. This whole thing worked by dumb luck alone.
This was your design from the beginning.
Please. You think too much of me.
Sauron then gets found by some orcs in the tower who are there to harm him, and it cuts to another scene. That's just after he skewered Celebrimbor. Now, I got some pushback for my last video on this show, because I think it's fair to say I was highly critical of the story last episode as well. The orcs were laying siege to an elven city, and for reasons, they were not using the trebuchets that they got from somewhere off camera to breach the walls of the city, and instead used them to hit a mountain several miles away, causing rocks to fall and dam a river. Now, I didn't like this for a lot of reasons, because firstly, that's not how trebuchets, dams or water work. Trebuchets can't even fire that far. The chance of random falling rocks causing a perfect watertight dam is frankly ridiculous, and the dam has shown, Well, even if it did hold water, the water would just rise and flow over the top of the dam almost instantly. Adar, the leader of the orcs, considers himself to be the orcs' father, and the show has shown him to have the motivation of wanting to save them. Yet by making the orcs charge an intact wall covered in archers in broad daylight across a wet riverbed covered in mud, he showed a complete disregard for their lives and safety. Even in this last episode, the orcs are now storming the city, and the orcs' trebuchets are still throwing burning rocks into the city that now contains their own men. And all that was in maybe 20 seconds of film. So not only does the show have difficulty being true to the source material, the story is written does not even have internal consistency. It contradicts itself from episode to episode, and Adar's actions not matching his motivations is just one example in what could be a very long list. As an example of the show not being true to the source material yet again, the orc leader Adar thinks he can defeat Sauron using the crown of Morgoth that Sauron reforged. And as one commenter pointed out under one of my videos, that directly goes against the source material in the Silmarillion. Morgoth's crown did not survive his fall in that book. When he was defeated by the Valar, essentially gods, Morgoth was chained, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck. I don't even know why Adar thinks that the crown and an elven ring can defeat Sauron, he just knows it from somewhere. Last episode had the siege battle and all that nonsense, and that episode has the same rating on IMDb as the 1987 film Predator, and I defy anyone to watch those two things back to back and tell me seriously that they think that episode of The Rings of Power is a match or better of that film, because the script for Predator is really well written. The best rated episode of this show is one from season 1. It's the one where Galadriel gets hit in the face with an exploding volcano and just walks away from it, and that sat on a rating on IMDb that would mean it's as good as films like Scarface, Heat, Aliens, and they're all classics. Again, watch them together and tell me that those things are close in quality. I got a comment on my review of last episode which said, quote, "Nerd quotes historical trebuchet ammunition weights while reviewing a high fantasy show with elves and magic with complete earnestness and seriousness." And I never thought I'd see this in the wild, because it's the Patrick Willems quote. It's the "Why are you criticising Star Wars? It's a story about space wizards intended for children. It doesn't matter if it makes no sense." I got another one that said, "It doesn't matter how the orcs brought the wall down." So if Adar, the leader of the orcs, had gone up to the wall alone and farted a hole in it, that would be fine to this commenter apparently, and it wouldn't be silly because it doesn't matter how the orcs made a hole in the wall. Of course it matters. Then we had a spirited discussion before they bravely ran away and deleted the entire comment thread. The Orcs leader has a stated motivation in the show of trying to save the Orcs' lives. If he chooses an option that gets them slaughtered when there's a choice not to, it contradicts his character. Adar, the leader of the Orcs, had ordered his army to charge the elves last episode, under the orders to Then he let Elrond live, he took Galadriel's ring from him, and we last saw him about to go into the Elven city to fight Sauron. This was his main motivation last episode, higher even than saving his orc children. In this episode, we learned that somewhere off camera and in between episodes, he just changed his mind. The next time we see Adar, he's in the woods alone. My best guesses for what happened, that Adar put on the elven ring, off camera, it purified him and his motivation changed. That would strike me as an important piece of the story to show, but they just didn't. Galadriel gets captured by some orcs and taken to Adar, who's on his own in the woods for reasons, and it appears he put on the elven ring off camera and it's made him into an elf again. Adar and Galadriel agree to take on Sauron together, but they're interrupted by orcs coming back from the tower where they confronted Sauron, and the one with the wife and child is on a stretcher. Adar goes over to see what's happened, and suddenly all of the orcs turn on Adar and tear him apart as Sauron walks into the scene. Presumably, Sauron turned the orcs to his side who were in the tower, and if he could do this, I don't know why he didn't do it earlier. They've frankly been very inconsistent in the writing of the show with what Sauron's powers are supposed to be. Maybe his powers are supposed to have grown with the creation and use of the rings, but that for me is not something the show has demonstrated well, or frankly at all. It needed some scenes directly showing that really to make it work. Galadriel and Sauron then have a long fight scene, and I didn't find any of it very thrilling. The show has just lost me completely. The choreography isn't great, it's a bit slow, and I just don't care about any of the characters. So the series ends with the elven refugees going north and founding Rivendell. Not sure what it is they're celebrating, they just lost most of their population. Isildur is going home to Numenor, where he'll probably get charged with treason, and he knows that. His father is on the run, King Pharazôn has decreed that those faithful to the elves are all traitors, and the dwarves have gone back home to argue about politics while they live with a demon of fire and darkness in their basement. The writing on this show is horrible.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.